What's interesting, Mark, is on social media, you've got this whole narrative that has erupted where people are blaming the ex-husband, Patrick Clancy. You know, he's now remarried, but people, and I was even in the airport today, Mark, and I overheard two young women talking about the husband, blaming him, saying he's got to somehow be responsible for this. He wasn't, you know, supportive enough. Look at this. This is a little bit of what he had to say.
He probably told them to go back down into the basement, that he was going to handle things, but then realized, oh, these kids were a witness. They've seen things that they can no longer unsee, and unfortunately, instead of being the hero dad, and this was a very unfortunate turn of events, now he had to take them down in the process because they were witnesses to what has occurred.
He yelled, "She killed the effing kids." Like, the way that that is worded is so freaking weird. I'm starting to believe this theory.
Are we ever going to get to hear from Lindsay? Because this entire thing is pushed by what Patrick's narrative is, and it's driving me insane. Something is off.
So what do you make, Mark, of this explosion of animosity towards the ex-husband on social media? And do you think if people at home are thinking this, is it possible that the jurors are also thinking about this?
Yeah, look, people are angry and they want someone to blame. And the more people they can blame, the better. And many people think, well, you should have known. You either knew or you should have known. You could have done more. But I also think it's, you know, people love conspiracy theories. People love it. Many of those same people think Elvis is still alive and that the landing on the moon was shot on a soundstage. You know, you're always going to have these people who, without any evidence to support it, a grieving father going through hell and back who tried to get her the help that he needs. That's how he came across to me. But people are entitled in the court of public opinion to say what they want, even if there is no basis to back it up.
I just want to go back to you, Bob. I keep thinking about the jury, and you have this really unique perspective because you're in there. And whenever I'm covering courts, like I'm always just watching the jury, trying to figure out what they might be thinking. Is it about half men and half women, roughly?
It's 12-6, women to men.
Okay.
And at this point, we don't know who's an alternate and
Right.
who's going to be deliberating.
So we don't know how it's going to shake out. What do you think that means, though, Bob, in terms of the male to female ratio? I mean, put on your criminal, I mean, you're kind of an observer for us right now, but you're also a criminal defense attorney. How is that going to play out?
You know, when I think about who the perfect juror is in a case like this, it's kind of impossible, you know, because the mama bear, probably not it. You know, do you want the man that's in his 50s who's not going to accept mental health issues? You know, like, to me, the perfect juror, believe it or not, is somebody in their mid to late 20s who, you know, because millennials seem to have grasped the concept of mental health in a way that older generations just haven't embraced. And the mental health aspect of this case is everything.
Patrick Clancy left his house in Duxbury at 5:15 on a Tuesday evening in January. His wife had picked the restaurant herself off the menu online earlier that afternoon. He said goodbye to her. He kissed the kids. Cora was 5. Dawson was 3. The baby, Callan, was 8 months old and had been fussy that week, which is why there was a pharmacy on the list at all. He was home by 6:09, 54 minutes. That number is going to come up over and over in a courtroom 3 years later because everything that mattered happened inside it. He noticed the quiet before he noticed anything else. He would say later that a house with 3 small children in it is never quiet, and this one was. He called upstairs. Nothing. He called her phone from the bottom of the steps and heard it ringing somewhere above him with nobody picking it up. The bedroom door at the top was locked, which it never was. He got it open. There was a knife on the nightstand next to a tumbler, one of those novelty ones people give new mothers as a joke, and the window on the far wall was standing wide open onto a 20-degree night. She was on the ground outside, underneath it, conscious. Broken in a way that would turn out to be permanent, and she told him where the children were. He was still on the line with the dispatcher when he opened the basement door. That is why there is a recording of what a man sounds like when he finds his son, and then his daughter, and then his infant. Jurors heard it this month. The judge gave them a break afterward. Lindsay Clancy has never denied doing it. Not at the arraignment, not through her lawyer, not now. She is a labor and delivery nurse who spent her working life on the other side of this, coaching strangers through the worst pain of their lives and handing them something alive at the end of it. In the 4 months before that Tuesday, she was prescribed 13 different psychiatric medications by a rotating cast of providers, told her husband she felt like she was disappearing, checked herself into a program, and was sent home from it. The prosecution says she was thinking clearly enough to time her husband's errands. Her lawyer says the woman who was in that basement had not been in her right mind for months, and that the people who were supposed to catch her are now named as defendants in 2 separate lawsuits. A warning before we go on. This case involves the deaths of 3 young children, graphic testimony, and an extended discussion of severe postpartum mental illness. It is a hard one. If today is not the day for it, close this and come back when it is. Welcome back to the Crime Executioner. We work from transcripts, filings, and testimony, not headlines. Subscribe and hit the bell, because this trial is running right now, and the defense has only just started. Lindsay Musgrove grew up in Wallingford, Connecticut, a town of about 40,000 people set between New Haven and Hartford. Her parents, Mike and Paula, still live there. Neighbors and family describe an ordinary childhood in an ordinary New England town, the kind of background that produces no early chapters for a documentary. She trained as a nurse and chose labor and delivery. That is not a specialty people fall into. It is one people select, and it puts them in a room with women on the worst and best day of their lives, responsible for keeping both patients alive and keeping the panic out of the room. Colleagues who worked alongside her would later tell a jury she was good at it. She married Patrick Clancy in 2016. Cora was born in January 2018. Dawson followed in 2019. The family made their home in Duxbury, a quiet coastal town roughly 35 miles south of Boston, the kind of place people move to specifically because of what it is not. Callan arrived in the spring of 2022, 3 children under 6. By September, something had shifted. Lindsay made an appointment with a psychiatrist, which is a step a lot of people talk about for months and never take. She went. She described what she was feeling. A prescription was written for her that same month. She did not take it. That detail matters more than it looks, because it cuts against the picture the state would eventually put in front of a jury. This was not a woman reaching for medication. She told her doctor she wanted to try therapy first, and she meant it. She held out for about 3 weeks. Then she started taking the pills. The psychiatrist who wrote that first prescription was Dr. Jennifer Tufts. The drug was sertraline, sold as Zoloft, one of the most commonly prescribed antidepressants in the country. Within a week of starting it, Lindsay reported back that she felt worse. The anxiety had sharpened rather than settled. She was not sleeping. Her thoughts were racing at night. In a normal case, that report triggers a reassessment. What happened instead was a change of drug. By November, she was seeing Julie Paul, a psychiatric nurse practitioner who put her on fluoxetine, sold as Prozac. Same class of medication, different molecule. Within days, Lindsay asked to switch again. She told Paul the side effects frightened her, that starting new medications was frightening, that she felt like she was going backward. By Thanksgiving, Patrick Clancy would later testify, his wife was not talking much, low energy, deeply depressed. He used the phrase rough shape. On November 30th, she began treatment with Rebecca Gelada, a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner at South Shore Health. Gelada did something none of the others had done. She raised the possibility of an underlying bipolar presentation and prescribed Seroquel, an antipsychotic. That question turns out to be the most consequential clinical moment in the entire timeline, because if it was bipolar, then months of antidepressants were not just failing to help, they were the wrong treatment. Patrick disagreed with the suggestion. The question was not pursued. In early December, Lindsay wrote to Gelada that she really needed help and was willing to try anything, that she felt numb, that she was having intrusive thoughts. Around the same time, she sat with Latiesha Dukes, a therapist at the South Shore Perinatal Clinic, and disclosed suicidal thoughts for the first time on record. She also told Dukes she believed she was becoming addicted to the sedatives she had been given for sleep. Two separate providers considered that fear unfounded. She kept raising it anyway. At home, the household had already reorganized itself around her. She could not sleep, so Patrick moved down to the basement to give her the bedroom. Both sets of grandparents came to stay so someone could hold the family together while he worked. A Boston Globe review of the court records counted 13 psychiatric medications prescribed to Lindsay Clancy across 4 months: antidepressants, antipsychotics, sedatives, mood stabilizers. Written by psychiatrists, nurse practitioners, emergency room doctors, and inpatient staff who in many cases had never spoken to one another. If you want to see where this system finally broke, stay with me, because it happens on New Year's Eve. Subscribe now so you do not miss it.
From Patrick to Lindsay, how's it going? Lindsay to Patrick, good. Lindsay to Patrick, okay, her urine looked good, so nothing going wrong with her kidneys, phew. Patrick to Lindsay, good, with a smiley face. Lindsay to Patrick, no message content. Patrick to Lindsay, oh wow. Patrick to Lindsay, you're a good mama. Lindsay to Patrick, smiley face with hearts. Lindsay to Patrick, blank. Patrick to Lindsay, laughed at an image. Lindsay to Patrick, any chance you want to do takeout from 3V, period, period, period. I didn't cook anything, period, period, period. It's been a long day, smiley face. Patrick to Lindsay, yeah, smiley face. Lindsay to Patrick, okie dokie, smiley face.
On the last night of 2022, Lindsay told her husband 3 things: that she had thoughts of wanting to die, that she felt numb, and that she was having intrusive thoughts about harming their children. Patrick put her in the car and drove her to the hospital. Sit with the sequence for a second. 24 days before the worst night of their lives, she named the specific danger out loud to the one person best positioned to act on it, and he acted on it immediately. Whatever else this case is, it is not a story about a family that ignored the warning signs. She was admitted to McLean Hospital in Belmont, one of the most respected psychiatric facilities in the United States, at around 4 in the morning on New Year's Day. On intake, she was recorded as medically stable. Her chief complaint, as documented, was that she was finding it hard to sleep without medication. According to her own later legal filings, she did not see a physician for 3 days. It was the holiday. Staffing was thin. Somewhere in those first days, she texted Patrick 4 words: "I don't belong here." The psychiatrist who eventually took over her care was Dr. Alia Goodhart, who came onto the case on January 3rd. Goodhart later told jurors that Lindsay raised concerns about an antipsychotic she had been given for insomnia, and about feeling numb, which is a known side effect of that drug. Goodhart diagnosed insomnia associated with a mental health condition and began tapering the medication down. After several nights of actual sleep, Lindsay asked to be discharged a day early. The reason she gave was Cora's birthday party. She wanted to be home with her family and her children. Goodhart described her as future-oriented, invested in her children, a caring mother. She booked her own follow-up outpatient care before she left. She was discharged on the afternoon of January 5 with prescriptions for an anti-anxiety drug and a sleep aid. Her own filings note the discharge paperwork recorded her insight and judgment as limited. On the stand, Goodhart told the jury that Lindsay had never stated any thoughts of harming anybody else. Kevin Reddington stood up and asked her a question that hangs over this entire case. Had she ever encountered patients who minimize their symptoms, who lie about them? 2 days after she came home, the Clancys threw Cora a party at a trampoline park. By every account, it was a good day. Lindsay had been sleeping. She was present, engaged, in the room with her children. Patrick would later say it gave him hope, and that he believed it gave her hope too. 19 days remained. Within a week, the symptoms she had described at McLean were back. Her own legal filings state the hallucinations returned roughly 7 days after discharge. On January 11th, she emailed Dr. Tufts. She wanted an opinion on ketamine therapy, a treatment sometimes used for depression that has not responded to anything else. In the same message, she wrote that this had been going on for months and that she was getting desperate for something that would work quickly to get her out of the depressed state she was in. Read that as what it is. A trained medical professional, 4 months into treatment, researching the outer edge of the pharmacy because the standard options had failed her. She went back to Tufts more than once that January. The medications changed again. She was switched to Valium. Later, she was prescribed amitriptyline, an older class of antidepressant, and by that point, she had cycled through most of what a general psychiatric practice has to offer. Somewhere in those weeks, she went online and searched for what might be wrong with her. The specific wording has been characterized differently by the two sides, and the jury has heard both versions. What is not disputed is the reason she gave for looking. She could not feel anything, and she wanted to know what kind of person that made her. On January 22, the Clancys took the two older children to dinner at the home of Kyle Carney, a college friend of Patrick's. Carney later told police that Lindsay seemed fairly normal that evening. On January 23, she had her final appointment with Dr. Tufts, 17 minutes. Her mood was recorded as flat. Her anxiety was up. She had no motivation. She had to force herself out of the house. Her sleep was poor, and her medication was not working. The record notes her psychiatric condition as unchanged. The next day was a Tuesday. The day itself was unremarkable, and both sides agree on that. She took Cora to the pediatrician. She played with the two older children in the backyard. She managed the baby. She made phone calls. She spoke to people who noticed nothing. In the afternoon, she looked at menus online across 3 different restaurants before settling on one in Plymouth. Prosecutors would later make a point of the choice. It was farther from the house than where the family usually ordered from. There was also a pharmacy stop to make, a prescription for one of the children. Patrick left at 5:15. He said goodbye to his wife and kissed the children on his way out. At 5:33, he called home from the pharmacy. She did not pick up. She rang him back a minute later, and they spoke about the medication. He would later describe the call as normal, except that she sounded like she was in the middle of something. He was back at the house at 6:09. What happened next is on tape, because he called emergency services within minutes of walking through the door, and the line stayed open. First responders would later describe that recording as the worst thing they had ever heard. Police, firefighters, and paramedics arrived at a house in Duxbury on a January evening and found a scene that several of them are still being asked to describe under oath 3.5 years later. During pretrial hearings, Kevin Reddington argued that the court should not force each of them to repeat it in front of a jury. He described what those first responders went through as horrific, and he was arguing on behalf of the woman they had come there for. Cora was 5. Dawson was 3. Neither of them survived the night. Callan, 8 months old, still had a pulse. He was flown to Boston Children's Hospital, where a team worked on him for 3 days. He died on January 27th. Lindsay was taken to South Shore Hospital and then to Brigham and Women's in Boston. She had broken ribs, fractures in her back, and a spinal cord injury at the T5 and T6 level. She was alive, and she would never walk again. What she said to investigators from that hospital bed shaped everything that followed. Subscribe now, because the next part is where the two versions of this case split apart for good. On January 26th, Plymouth District Attorney Timothy Cruz stood in front of the press and announced that Lindsay Clancy was in custody in a Boston hospital and would be arraigned as soon as she could be. At that point, Callan was still alive. The initial charges covered 2 homicides, 3 counts of strangulation, and assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. Asked directly whether postpartum depression was a factor, Cruz declined to say. The arraignment happened on February 7th. She appeared by video link, lying in a hospital bed, paralyzed. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Sprague laid out the state's theory in that hearing, and it has not moved since. This was planned. She engineered the window of time she needed and used it. On the question of the fall, Sprague told the court that Clancy had lowered herself from the window and dropped, and added a line that has followed the case ever since. She did not think the prosecutor believed she had accounted for the fact that the ground was frozen. Kevin Reddington answered with a question rather than a theory. She had no reason to kill those children, so ask yourself why. And when you ask why, and you look at everything that had been happening to her, what you find is a woman who was already in trouble. A grand jury indicted her on September 15, 2023, on 3 counts of murder and 3 counts of strangulation. She has been held since her arrest at Duxbury Hospital, a state facility, under court-ordered treatment. Her trial would not begin for another 3 years. The trial date moved 4 times. December 2025, pushed to January 2026 to avoid the holidays, then February, then July at the defense's own request. The delay was not procedural drift. It was both sides building. Reddington filed a motion to split the trial in 2. One phase on whether the state could prove she committed the acts. A second phase, only if needed, on whether she could be held responsible for them. He argued the alternative forced him to concede guilt in order to mount his defense. Prosecutors answered that no such right exists and that the 2 phases would be near identical because her state of mind is inseparable from what she did and how long it took. Judge William Sullivan denied it. Reddington also asked to videotape the state's psychiatric evaluation of his client and to see juror information before the first day. Separately, he offered to have her formally acknowledge her involvement, which would have stripped the trial down to the single question of her mental state. Prosecutors pushed back on that too. The state went after the New Yorker, seeking the reporter's notes and recordings from an interview Patrick gave. Prosecutor Julianne Campbell told the court the significance was plain. The husband had reported statements the defendant made about the crime itself. Jury selection began on June 20 in Plymouth Superior Court. The witness list ran to nearly 200 names. Sullivan told the seated panel to expect 6 to 8 weeks. Openings were delivered on July 27th, and the state's first witness was already waiting. It was her husband. Prosecutor Shanan Buckingham opened for the Commonwealth. The case she outlined was not about whether Lindsay Clancy killed her children. It was about a woman who was in control of herself that evening, who understood exactly what she was doing, and who intended to take her children with her when she went. Patrick Clancy took the stand the same day. He is now her ex-husband. He divorced her after the killings and moved to New York City. He is also the plaintiff in a lawsuit against the people who treated her. He testified for the prosecution anyway, and what he gave them was the deterioration, in his own words, month by month, from a man who had watched it happen from inside the house. Then Jennifer Sprague put a bag of prescription pill bottles into evidence and walked him through them one at a time. He said he had not known how many she was taking. Between September and January, he confirmed, the prescriptions had come from at least 3 separate providers. She showed him a photograph of Cora. She asked whether that was what his daughter was like in early 2023. He stopped. Reddington objected, and the lawyers went to sidebar. When it ended, Patrick described his children while taking long pauses to get through the answers. Across the room, Lindsay reached for tissues. The providers came next, and this is where the state did its most effective work. One after another, the clinicians who had actually sat in a room with her told the jury the same thing. They saw anxiety, they saw depression, they saw insomnia. They did not see psychosis. The last witness the Commonwealth called was Ian Whiffin, a digital forensics specialist from Cellebrite, whose name Massachusetts jurors may recognize from the Karen Reed trials. Whiffin did not offer an opinion about her mind. He offered her phone and her watch. The data showed her movements that evening, including the device climbing 2 flights of stairs beginning at 5:33. It showed the check she ran on Apple Maps, which the state says was a calculation of how long her husband would be gone, and it showed her search history. On January 18th, 6 days out, ketamine for suicidal ideation. On January 19th, symptoms of postpartum psychosis. Then, psychosis symptoms. The prosecution rested on Monday, August 17th, after calling 71 witnesses across 3 weeks. Those last 2 searches are the strangest evidence in the case, because both sides want them. The defense began its case the same morning the state finished. No recess, no pause. The first witness Kevin Reddington called was Paula Musgrove, Lindsay's mother. She told the jury that her daughter had always wanted to be a mother, had wanted many children, and that motherhood was the best thing that ever happened to her. Then she described what she had watched take hold in the months before. She testified that her daughter kept saying the same thing to her, that this was not her mind, that this was not her, that she had never been like this. Musgrove told the jury she agreed with her, because it was true. Lindsay's sister followed. Then former colleagues from the hospital where she had worked, women who had stood beside her through deliveries and who now had to describe her from a witness box. Then the defense started answering the evidence directly. Dr. Michael Vulfovich, an emergency medicine physician at Newton Wellesley Hospital, testified as an expert on her injuries. That testimony exists for one reason. The state has argued from the beginning that the fall was staged, that she lowered herself down rather than jumped. Reddington is putting a doctor in front of the jury to tell them what a person actually does to their own body when they mean it. Today, day 15 of testimony, the defense called Dr. Donald Condie, a clinical and forensic psychiatrist with expertise in psychopharmacology. Judge Sullivan allowed him over the prosecution's objection. Condie told the jury plainly that he had never met Lindsay Clancy and had never evaluated her. He worked from the records. And his assessment of the treatment records kept by Dr. Jennifer Tufts was that they were somewhat sparse. Many checkboxes, he said, and not a great deal of writing describing what actually happened in the sessions. Attorney Keith Halpern, who has run insanity defenses himself, made an observation about the state's case that is hard to unhear. 71 witnesses, and not one of them testified that they had ever heard her say she was unhappy with her life. She sits through all of it in a wheelchair, brought in daily from a locked state psychiatric facility. Some days have ended early because she could not continue. The experts who did examine her have not testified yet. Subscribe now so you are here when they do. Here is what makes this case genuinely difficult and not just tragic. Postpartum psychosis does not look the way people expect it to look. Reproductive psychiatrists describe it as a mood disorder that comes and goes across a single day. A woman can appear steady 1 hour and not be steady the next. It more often produces fixed false beliefs than the visible hallucinations most people picture, and there is no test for it. There are good screening tools for postpartum depression and anxiety. There is nothing that identifies psychosis with any certainty. Patrick Clancy has said that in all those months, across all those providers, not one of them ever raised the words postpartum psychosis with him. That failure, if a jury ever calls it one, is now the subject of 2 lawsuits. Patrick filed for wrongful death and malpractice. Lindsay filed her own. Between them, they named Dr. Jennifer Tufts, nurse practitioners Rebecca Gelada and Julie Paul, therapist Letitia Dukes, Dr. Aaliyah Goodhart, and other physicians, along with Astor Mental Health, South Shore Health System, McLean Hospital, and Women and Infants Hospital of Rhode Island. The defendants dispute the claims. Tufts told the court she does not believe she was negligent. None of it has been decided. The criminal question comes first, and there are only 2 doors. A conviction for first-degree murder carries life in prison in Massachusetts with no possibility of parole. A finding that she is not criminally responsible sends her into commitment proceedings and, in all likelihood, a locked psychiatric hospital for a very long time. There is no version of this where she goes home. Patrick has said he asked her afterward whether she planned it, whether that was why she sent him out that night. He said she told him no, that it was like a snap of the fingers. 12 jurors in Plymouth are being asked to decide whether that is true. They have not answered yet.